And we are live. All right. This is the first episode of Men's Rights Meta, and with me, your host, Rachel Edwards. And today we're going to talk about, among other things, the role of theists and atheists play in the larger men's movement. I think I would like to start this conversation by talking about a little bit about my background. I am an atheist, and one of the things, oh God, is
Did you just say you broke up? Did you just say atheist?
Yes, I am. I absolutely am.
Heretic. I have to destroy you. No, go ahead.
Oh yeah. No, but I've been an atheist probably for about I think about 5 years now. It's something is still relatively new, and I think one of the things that I would like to discuss early on is that I do recognize that there is, we get a bad rap and everything like that, because there definitely is, there's some things that are negative, I think, about the larger atheist community, and it was something that I wasn't able to realize until I got out of this bubble, because I found that the only people I was talking to regularly were atheists for a while. And one of the things that happened was I got involved with the men's movement, and started becoming more vocal about men's rights. And I found that all of those people who had previously been so nice to me got really, really hostile as a result of that, because a lot of them were on the social justice end of things, and it was very difficult for them to wrap their minds around a lot of the things that we're talking about. Whereas we also have a lot of atheists who are sympathetic to the cause, and they get involved, and they're also members of the movement. But one of the things I realized that I wasn't aware of was just how negative I started being towards people who were religious. And I was being hostile to them for no reason. And I was being I was really being kind of an ass. And I didn't realize it until I started talking to people, and I realized just how ridiculous that was. And I think it's just a normal part of the initial reaction to the world after you deconvert from religion and you decide to leave it. And I don't think that that's necessarily helpful to what we're trying to do. When you get involved in the men's movement, one of the things that happens is that you find that there is no political leaning that is necessarily going to be helpful or back you when you become an activist for men's rights. And there's no particular religious background that's not going to necessarily be behind you. There's not necessarily going to be any one community that's going to, I mean, there will be people who will be more likely to form an alliance with you, but they have their own interests in mind. But I think that one of the things that I really enjoyed about all this and the process that I had to go through to become a little more balanced is I think it really just kind of balanced me out. It gave me I became less hostile to people who were religious as a result of interacting with people in the movement and having to put aside differences to fight for a larger cause that I think is incredibly important. So what would you respond to that, Dean?
Actually, I'm gonna start by noting, for anybody who's watching, Rachel was doing really hard work before the hangout trying to figure out how to fucking turn on comments. Comments are not on. We don't know why, because we actually want to hear from you. I don't know what's going on with that. So I'm just saying, we don't know what's going on with that. We actually want to hear from people, but that's okay, because there's going to be comments afterwards, and there's Twitter, and we're not hard to find, because I'm not.
And I enabled chat and everything. So if it's not working, I am very, very sorry, because I actually went in there. I had to go through verification and everything like that, and it pretty much told me to go fuck myself. And so I'm sitting here wondering, wishing that I could hear from all of you, and
also
it's just kind of sad.
Yep, and also I've never mentioned this before, but people have often commented in chat and other things when I make videos that I sound really breathy. And just so people know, I even tend to sound excited when I'm not. I actually am disabled. I have a neurological condition that does weird things to my breathing, and that is all that is going on. Yes, if I get, even if I get a tiny bit excited, like would raise your pulse 5 beats a minute, I sound like I'm running a marathon when I'm not even that excited. So that's just there. And people commented on the time, oh, you fat fuck, get some exercise, or, oh, look how upset he is. Neither one's happening, actually. I have a breathing issue. So what's your comment on that? I can tell you where I'm coming from on that, which is that I was raised in a sort of bifurcated, my mom and stepdad put me into mainline Protestantism, Presbyterianism to be specific. And my dad taught me fundamentalist Christianity out of the King James Bible through people like Pat Robertson and them. I became atheist and was atheist for many, many years. I changed my mind on that. I'm not here to tell you my life story on that or convince you that I have found the right path that you need to follow. But, you know, I was welcomed formally into the Catholic Church, Easter Mass 2010, in my mid-40s as a choice after deciding I was not convinced anymore that atheism had answers. Now, again, I don't need you to endorse my path, although I do notice it's interesting. I did a video recently, and I was angry. I was mostly angry on behalf of my Muslim friends, of which I have a number. And the part of that anger was driven by the terror attacks in Paris and me thinking about my Muslim friends and what they're actually going through. And if that makes you sad, sorry. I mean, I got one from a friend who was like, they've been screaming at me and saying I'm in a hate cult since I was a 12-year-old boy. It's really hard to sit through this because I hate these terrorists. I have family members who are being killed in the Middle East by these terrorists. And these people just want to scream at me. And that's just something I take to heart, you know. That's not helpful to people. And I would point out, maybe Rachel can add it to the low bar, because I went ahead and I didn't delete my video, but I went ahead and hit it and got rid of it because I was too angry when I wrote it. It's not like I take back what I said per se, but how I said it could have been a lot more diplomatic. I am a theist. I mean, and I hew towards something called Orthodox Christianity, which is so different from fundamentalism and different from most forms of Protestantism. It's like you're not even on the same page. I'm not here to defend the Catholic Church, although I can do it better than most people think it can be done. But it's really more the anger and the frustration comes. Here's what I see. I mean, you got a right to your views, including your views on, you know, religion is bad. On the other hand, when I came into the formal men's movement, even though I've been, you know, interested in these issues for 20 years or more, I realized one of the things I'm going to have to do is keep my mouth shut. In fact, you'd be shocked how many of my friends in the men's movement looked at me like I just said I'm from Mars when I said, oh, by the way, I'm Catholic. Most of them had been working with me for years and didn't even know that. And you know why? It's not because I was ashamed of it. It's because I realized I'm not here to proselytize. I have really strong opinions on gun control. I'm not telling you where I fall on that. I have opinions on abortion. Believe it or not, they're not as simple as you probably think, since I think it should be legal. I have strong political views on the Middle East and what's going on there. I almost never say any of them, especially if I'm working in a men's issues. Let's call it men's rights or men's issues. I almost never talk about them unless I'm being really careful, because I know those are issues that instantly polarize and are not helpful. Yeah. One of the things when I first came in was there was a whole lot of right-wingers in the men's movement. And that didn't bother me. I share views with some of them, some of their views, right? But it was also increasingly obvious to me, wait a minute, this is the men's movement. This isn't an ancillary arm of the Republican Party. You know, it's just not. And it's not an ancillary arm of the Democratic Party. I'm not here to talk to you about what exactly our monetary policy is. I've had libertarians try to tell me, if you're not a libertarian, you're not a men's rights advocate. And I've had to be kind of rude to them and say, no, you don't get to come in here and start barking orders and setting the agenda. You're welcome in the tent. All of these people that I'm talking about. I mean, I've been called, you're welcome as a Christian conservative or an atheist conservative, a libertarian, whatever it is. You've got to have the adult attitude of, I'm not here to convert people on these other issues. That's kind of what I'm saying. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Well, I can definitely understand that. And I think there's definitely a concern in a lot of people about a co-opting of the movement for political gain, or for just any number of these other kinds of causes. I think people are, they're genuinely afraid that somebody's going to come along and try and use the movement to get back at the left, or get back at a certain group of people, or just a lot of different things right now. And I think that is actually pretty legitimate. I mean, one of the things that we've noticed is that when we look at who supports us and who actually puts out our message, it's ultimately the conservatives who actually give us a shot and give us a fair representation. But ultimately but ultimately I think that they are using us to just get back at feminists, to get back at those who are not particularly religious and aren't particularly conservative, and we should be wary of all that.
And wary is the only word I'd use there, not unwelcoming, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I even had one thing that I wrote on Voice for Men not long before I left, actually, and it was written to conservative Christians, and people were mad at me about it because I was really mean to them. At least I don't think I was, but I don't think I was mean. I think I was really stern and really forthright. And the bottom line was, if you're going to be a Christian, act like one, study what the Bible says about humility, and stop walking in and thinking you're in charge and can just start flinging Bible verses at people, and you're going to straighten us all out. Don't do that. That's fucking rude. Okay. But I'm sorry, I'm getting upset. I'm getting upset. But
that's okay. But I think I would like to address the elephant in the room before I go further, and that is, recently in the past couple of days, there was, you did go online and you were upset with atheists, calling them anti-theists and things like that, and it was over a concern for your friends who are, of course, Muslim. And I want to know if you really think that the conversation that happened afterwards was particularly useful, at least from the perspective of trying to not alienate people and trying to be accepting of all sorts of individuals into this movement.
To be blunt, I don't know. I know I hurt some friends' feelings. On the other hand, part of me thinks, but I made them hear something they don't get to hear very often. And so that's always a rough call, because I've often found that, at least when dealing with there's this thing that's come up in the last decade and a half, which is called the New Atheists, or the New Atheist movement. And even when I've referenced it, some people accuse me of making the term up, which is funny. Just go Google New Atheists. The New Atheists are Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, and Daniel Dennett. And they have a lot of fans in the atheist community, a lot. And they, unlike previous generations of atheists, who were generally philosophically content to coexist with their theist friends, decided that atheism, or that theism that religion is a toxic force in the world. And to say that, I didn't make up the phrase anti-theist. On my Twitter followers, there's tons of people who are on their own walls self-identifying not just as atheist, but anti-theist. And they get rude, and they get aggressive, and they think they're righteous. And they're proud of it. I mean, when I made the video, A shit ton of them came into the comments opening with things like, well, since you confessed you embraced you left atheism, so you embraced irrationality, why should we listen to anything you have to say? To which my response would be, did you think that was a constructive way to start? Because I see that a lot.
Well, yes, and you know what, I will address that. I will address that point. I will say that I actually have seen not just you know, a disdain for those who are religious, but just I would say even a dehumanization of people who are theistic and who do practice religion in the communities. They will go out of their way to actually try and suggest that, you know, the way that they speak about people who practice religion is very dehumanizing and is absolutely very disrespectful. However, there is, I think in their minds it's very difficult for them to think that anybody who can practice religion can also be a reasonable person. And it depends, I would think, from person to person, in my opinion, whether or not that determines whether or not you can be a rational person. I mean, there's a big difference between somebody who is just, you know, your cookie cutter Christian to somebody who is basically a flat earth, someone who believes that the earth is flat still, and who denies science altogether.
You see a lot of that, and it's hard for me sometimes because I'm real sympathetic. Although from my perspective, and by the way, this isn't a new perspective at all. Go back and find this shit 100 years ago. To me, fighting with creationists is shooting fish in a barrel. I'm sorry to my fellow Christian friends who are sympathetic to creationists. That's fucking stupid shit. Okay, it really is. And that's something that Rome, for example, came to peace with about 150 years ago. It's before anybody here was alive. You know, Vatican doctrinally declared there's no problem here. You believe you know, the Bible tells how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go, as the old phrase goes. I don't want to get into heaven and what that means. The point is that religion is very much a spiritual journey for people, and if you don't want to take it, you don't have to. Disparaging people does no good. And furthermore, I would also note, and this is style points or take it whatever you want, when you go through history and you just accept some story you've been told about a religion, you're saying something about yourself when you just accept that tale. One of the ones that gets flung at me so often, for example, is the tale of Galileo. Now, I'm not going to go over the tale of Galileo again, except to tell you all most of what you think you know there is false. And if you politely approach somebody who knows something about it, they can tell you all about it. One of my favorite fellow Christians, an Orthodox Christian, Eve Canaan, she's a philosophy professor and she's a gamer-gator, and Eve's awesome, and she's worth following on Twitter alone. I'll give her a shout out. She's awesome. She's so funny, and she really, really knows her stuff. You don't want to get into an argument with her on anything unless you come correct, because she knows her stuff, and it's not just theist stuff. She's a full-on professor of philosophy. If your logic and terminology are off, you're going to get in trouble. Now, she's not going to convert you, but I'm just pointing it out. If you want to engage with theists who are intelligent and know their shit, she's a very good example.
Okay.
And that would be the main thing. It's like, if you're truly curious about these issues, one of the rudest things to do is tell other people what they believe, or tell other people what the true version of their beliefs is. Because once you've told people what their beliefs are, you've projected your beliefs into them, rather than just asking them, what do they think?
Can I respond to that for a moment? I want to respond to this because I know that there will probably be atheists who are watching. What would you say to those who felt that the other day when you were calling a lot of atheists anti-theists and sort of lumping them all in together with people who just hate religion for the sake of hating religion? What would you say to those people who felt as though you unfairly portrayed their position by suggesting that they are basically bigots, when they might individually have, different positions on all of these issues. Whereas, they may not actually be Islamophobes. They might actually just have a genuine concern about the culture war that's happening right now among these people who are committing severe crimes against others.
It's hard, okay? Because when I look at what I said, I thought I tried to make a distinction between your everyday run-of-the-mill atheist and obvious anti-theists with an axe to grind, picking this, that, or the other fact, historical or current, and flinging it up as the answer as to why this faith or this religion or this belief system must be evil. And I can only say that the anti-theist portion is very real. And I was approached, at least on Twitter, by a number of atheists, privately and otherwise, saying that they basically agreed and they were sorry so many other fellow atheists were acting like assholes. So that may be a conversation the atheist community, which I am not part of, may want to have within itself. I'm sorry if I'm sorry if I tarred somebody who's not like that. It wasn't my intention to do so. When you're writing in passion, sometimes things come out. So rather than go back and parse line by line everything I just said, let me just blanket say it. I know you're not all like that. I used to be one of you. Half my friends are atheists. I like hanging out with atheists. They're generally fun people and interesting people. And I even find that their atheism tends to, not always, but tends to make them really good at empiricism and science, because that atheism can be like Occam's razor and help you really cut through to the bone of the matter. Just be careful with that razor, what you're doing with it, because sometimes it's going to cause you to make sloppy generalizations that just aren't true.
Yes. Well, you spoke about, and one of these things that this is just my concern, because you spoke about keeping a civil tongue and things like that, and being generally respectful. And my concern is about, with things like that and conversations that are taking place there. Let me collect my thoughts for a moment.
Well, let me put it this way. When people started commenting on my YouTube videos, and some of them on Twitter, but it was mostly on my YouTube videos, they were angry and insulting, and I was hesitantly angry and insulting back. Well, yes. You can either say that is wrong, or you can say that's me setting a boundary and say, hey, I'm not here to play. You're going to come in and you're going to insult people, not even my own faith.
My concern is that often when we're suffering from things like activism burnout and things like that, what ends up happening is sometimes we forget to adjust and forget that we're talking to people who are allies and not our enemies. And we find ourselves talking to other people as if they were the people that we often speak against, and with the same kind of ferocity.
That is definitely a problem, and it's definitely a problem for all of us in the men's movement, at least if we've been in this for long. Advocating for men's and boys' issues has to be the hardest thing I've ever seen to do, and it's astounding. You listen to people like, and I love Sargon, by the way, but say they don't do anything. Oh my God, I wanted to fly to England and find him and choke him, right? It was just, don't do anything. What? And then you get feminists constantly accusing. In fact, this pattern may even be part of it, and what can set off the anger. Feminists have a habit of flinging out accusations, and most of us as activists have just kind of learned almost like, karate or taekwondo. Oh, flat! And you have your instant snark response prepared because you get so tired of it, right? And then that habit of just insta answering can bite you on the ass when you really needed to calm the fuck down. I know I'm guilty of that. I really do. Which is why, by the way, I have a standing policy. I don't tend to block people anymore on Twitter. I do on YouTube. But invariably, if somebody writes me and says, hey, come on, what'd you block me? I just unblock them. because, you know, it's almost more of a timeout than anything. But yeah, we all get that. And when you're advocating for men's and boys issues, you get snark, not just from feminists, you get it from conservatives, you get it from so-called skeptics, you get it from the range of people who don't want to hear what you're saying. We can theorize as to why that is, but yeah, so I can just sit there, and you almost have to develop canned responses in your head. And then some other conversation comes up, and now you're kind of locked in to that brain mode of it being much harder to respond to somebody without having that same kind of attitude. And I don't know how you dance that, because one of the things I firmly believe too is that being obnoxious and rude about men's and boys issues has truly, I believe, forced a lot of people to stop and think. And I've seen that happen too with, you know, well, that Paul Elam is an asshole, but, and now, or Dean Esmay is an asshole, but, and then whatever's on the other side of the but will be a perfectly pristine men's rights talking point.
Well, you know, that's one of the reasons why I actually, you know, we're still friends. I mean, I think we disagree on a great deal of things, but I still respect you as a person, and I respect you as an activist. So
I remember, I'm going to call out a great example, and this is Phil Mason, Thunderfoot, Dr. Mason. During his little, his big schism with free thought blogs, yes, I followed all those events with some sympathy, and I admit a little amusement. But I remember one of Dr. Mason's questions for P.Z. Myers was, okay, you're an atheist and you're a liberal and you're a Democrat. Do you have any Christian friends? Do you have any Republican friends? Or do you just seal yourself away from those people and their views? And of course, Myers had no answer. But I respected Dr. Mason for that one, because I'm like, he gets it. All right, I am whatever this, you know, he is whatever he is politically, in terms of his skepticism and his theism, but he's not stupid enough to say, well, I'm just going to lock all these people with these other ideas out of my universe. That's not helpful. So even when I sometimes think, when he goes after like creationists or whatever, I mean, maybe somebody has to do that job. But I go, well, you're shooting fish in a barrel, but maybe someone needs, you know, maybe those fish need killing.
Could you explain what you mean by how, you know, attacking creationists is like shooting fish in a barrel? I'm just curious.
I can't detect anybody in what I would call Orthodox Christianity, which is Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, most types of mainline Protestant, who has any sympathy for creationists at all. You can ask them. Like, they're doing the Bible wrong. I mean, when the Bible was written, we didn't even have science. That had to be invented, which the church was instrumental in inventing, by the way. But science was in fact invented. Empiricism was a way because let's say you don't have empiricism. You've never heard of science. You just don't know what those are, right? Which was most people 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and so on years ago. Who has the truth? Who knows what the truth is? Now, obviously, the primitive answer is going to be God, but that's a primitive way of looking at it. You really didn't. I mean, even think of a family dispute that you have. Who's right? You often can't tell. Who's truth? Religious authorities were put in to say, look, this is correct doctrine and this is not correct doctrine. And for the longest time, there were fights going back and forth. Well, this discovery seems to go against that theological point. This discovery seems to go against that theological point. There were instances, some very exaggerated, like the Galileo case, but there were instances where, you know, scientists were punished for theological sins, which is like, that's not appropriate. Empiricism came about as a way to say, all right, you're going to study matter. You're going to study matter and energy, and you're going to find what you find, and keep yourself out of theological arguments. Just see what you find. and you find what you find. And then it will be on to the theologians or whoever to say, all right, well, does this even present a challenge to our faith? In most cases, it won't. Sometimes it might. You know, evolution did present a challenge. People had to think about it for a while. But it's also something most people came to peace with a long time ago. Again, most mainline Orthodox Christian denominations just did. Within the Orthodox view of Christianity, and this, by the way, is true for Orthodox Muslims, Orthodox Jews, and quite a few other religions, the very idea that science can contradict God's law or vice versa is like a non sequitur. It's just a non sequitur. It doesn't compute. The general theological position of most Orthodox faiths is that God is an infinite being completely outside of time and space. God is what makes the laws of physics even possible. And so things like math and physics fit very perfectly within that theological framework. So it's a sub-school of thought. Empiricism winds up being a sub-school of thought within a broader theological framework. And
that's a lot of stuff that you're unpacking there.
I know, but it's true. I know Professor Canadian, if she's listening, she'll go, yeah.
Okay, I will submit a couple of things here. I will say that one of the things that we are, of course, limited to is our own perception, is human perception.
That's right.
And yeah, that's within the confines of what we can really begin to measure the natural world, is through our own human perception. And if there's anything beyond that perception, there's no way we can then measure that particular thing, because
well, I mean,
it's outside of our
electron microscopes and radio telescopes. We do have inbuilt tools.
Well, yes. What I'm saying is that even so, you still have to be able to see those things through the telescope and the microscope with your own eyes, and if you can, maybe magnify sound, things like that, you still have to be able to pick those things up with your ears. Anything outside of that is you're going to need computers to then break that down into information that we can understand. Mm-hmm. And so I will, of course, admit that, but there's just a lot there.
Well,
just brought up.
And these are interesting things to debate, right? But and adults should be able to have these conversations.
Yes.
But let me just point this to you, because I've had, again, this is a lot to unpack, but Orthodox thinkers, at least those with a philosophical bent, would not even call you an atheist. They would not call Dr. Mason an atheist.
Why?
No, they wouldn't call you atheists. Because it's not a precise enough term of your belief system. We would call you materialists.
Okay.
And this goes, take away what you think materialism means, and let me explain materialism. And by the way, this is like a.
I know it's philosophy. No, I know you're talking about. I know it's
really old stuff.
It's a philosophical.
Right?
Yeah, it's a philosophical position. Basically, for those who are listening, from what I understand about this, it actually has to do with the idea of whether or not you believe that everything around you can then be measured and categorized. Basically, what is a material around you, whether or not it can be measured.
I'm going back many, many centuries here, even to pre-Christian times, and all the way back to the likes of Aristotle. Okay, this is not some new innovation I'm coming up with in Christian doctrine. This has been around among Christian thinkers forever, since before there was a Christianity. And that is, what you just said there is talking about, like, within the universe, there may be things we can detect or can't detect, and within the universe, there'll be this, that, and the other thing that we can measure or not measure, and maybe some things in the universe won't be measured. The Orthodox concept of God, and I can show this to you in Church Fathers, I can show it to you among 1,000-year-old Jewish thinkers and all that. God is 100% not bound by the laws of physics or the laws of time and space. God is outside of time and space.
Well, how would you know that, though?
Well, that gets to something called the argument from contingency, which some people like and some people don't. The argument from contingency is one I accept. It's one of the things that got me over the hump into faith, but you don't have to. But let's just put it to you this way. I don't have to explain to you how that's possible. I can tell you it's standard doctrine. God is bigger than all of this time and space. All of it. God's existence is outside as well as within time and space. So the idea that you can use math or physics to find God or prove or disprove God is sort of absurd on its face. Now, you don't have to accept that logic, but I'm telling you, it's real common wisdom among Orthodox religious thinkers. God, if there is only one God, is entirely outside of space, time and space. He doesn't play by them. And we only use the word he for human convenience. He's far more than a man. And he's not a big guy with a beard. We are talking about an infinite being, bigger than the entire universe, older than the entire universe, completely infinite in all directions. Our entire universe fits within that. This isn't Dean Esmay's opinion. I can show it to you in Aquinas. I can show it to you in the Church Fathers. We don't have to argue with it, but just like when I see materialists ask me, you know, what about this, physics, math, whatever, it's like, well, you've already jumped. You've already made a logical jump there. You want me to accept that it's all measurable within time and space and within the parameters of mathematical language, whereas from the perspective of a lot of us, it's like, you're going within a subset of the known universe by using physics there. Okay. Physics is a philosophy. That's kind of how we see it. So it's like, I remember even hearing an interview with an Orthodox bishop once, a really, really well-known one, and he also has a degree in astronomy, and he used to study astronomy, and I heard him being interviewed on NPR, and the reporter was like, how can you be interested in, you know, knowing the universe is billions of years old and all that, and how big it is, and all this stuff from science that contradicts your faith? And he just said, it was like he barely understood the question. It's like, why would there be a contradiction in any of that? And that's because there isn't one. Okay,
I would like to bring this back on topic.
Sure.
What I would like to do is, I think the problem here that a lot of people are having is not that they have a problem even with religious people practicing their religion. I think what a lot of people have problems with are these certain individuals who have a problem with any other belief system outside of their own, or lack thereof.
Yeah, and that is a regrettable human trait. And the only thing I'll say about that is if you've been involved in the active online atheist community the last 5 years or so, I'm not trying to snark, but guys, if you can't see how many dogmatic, intolerant, fact-deprived, and proselytizing atheists there are out there, you're out of your gourd. I'm sorry. Look at Steve Shives. The man is impervious to fact. Look at P.Z. Myers. He's constitutionally incapable of being a decent human being to anybody near him. I call him Bishop Myers because he acts like a really nasty asshole of a bishop in some kind of weird social justice-y pseudoscience church he's running. Sorry, I'm getting excited.
Well, yeah, but I think one of the problems here, and the problem with those individuals, is that they have boxed themselves in. And I think the question a lot of us probably have is, how can we keep ourselves in the men's movement from being boxed in the way that these feminist atheists are? Because we, of course, believe that we're right and things like that.
And a lot of people, they're right. Yeah.
But the situation is that I think a lot of people tend to just box themselves in so much that they don't listen to anybody else, and they don't talk to people on the outside. They don't talk to feminists. They don't talk to religious people, or they don't talk to atheists, and they don't talk to just different sorts of people. They kind of get so scared, I think, of the outside world because of the level of gynocentrism and everything. They feel so unsafe that perhaps they box themselves off from other people who don't share the same views. And I think that if we do that, we can fall into the exact same trap.
Absolutely, and that's where it gets to. This is where I think And this is specifically to the anti-theist brigade, which can we at least concede they exist? How much of a, you know,
I
how
will at
much
least
are they?
admit.
I mean,
I
when you
will
have
at least
people calling
admit.
themselves anti-theists, you pretty much got an anti-theist there, right?
Okay, I will at least admit that there are definitely people who are so angry with religion
Yeah.
that they are actually against it because they believe that that is the source of all evil in the world. But I would actually suggest that the source of a lot of these problems are just human things that people need to admit exists in all of us. It's not any one thing. It's just part of human beings and part of human nature that really is at fault for all of this. And there's some of these things that you're just not going to solve. And so everybody starts looking for the one thing that they need to defeat to try and make the world a better place. But even if you were to defeat that one thing, you're not going to change human beings and you're not going to change the nature of man. More like,
it's my firm belief that cultish behavior, and there is a difference between religion and cultism. I know there's people who will say, no, they're the same thing. No, there really is a difference. I can even recommend a book to you.
Tell me the difference.
Cults actually tend to be totalist systems that tend to force you, that tend to micromanage every single aspect of your life and severely punish you if you deviate.
All right.
And they are also more prone towards really literal brainwashing techniques that you literally might find the KGB or the CIA using. Really hardcore fuck with your brain and leave you a different human being. And mainstream religion, yes, I mean, there's been Christian cults. No question. There's, that's all happened. Okay, and we can talk like adults about that too. There's even cultish aspects within the current Catholic Church, within Orthodox circles. They're there because certain people are attracted to and easily led by a cult. But the best thing about a cult, the best thing to identify the cult is that it's totalist, and it's 24/7, and you're not getting out of there without a fight.
I think that there are actually, I think there's a list, if I'm not mistaken, of different aspects of cult behavior and things like that. And feminism has a tendency to fall under all of that.
Yeah, and some of the mainline religions will fall into it now and then, this or that group within it. Jehovah's Witness have a not picking on them particularly, but they have a reputation for being really nasty and intolerant toward anybody who leaves. Mormons used to have that reputation. I don't know if they're better or not, and I don't want to argue about it because I'm not a Mormon. The Mormons can address that problem. But yeah, there's this really good book. I'll have to find the author, but it's called Snapping. And it was Snapping, S-N-A-P-P-I-N-G, Snapping. It was written by two psychologists back in the 90s, and it examined the example of what cults really were, and did a real good job from a psychological perspective of saying this is what distinguishes them from a mainline religion. And like any checklist like that, it's like, well, you can find ways to make a lot of things look culty, but really, they've done a number on your brain in a big way. And to presume that the religious, I call this the religious believer zombie theory, which is that we get our Bible and we listen to our priest, and now we're a zombie horde, ready to follow orders.
Well,
no, that's what really tiny cults typically do, and that's what religious fundamentalists do. And
one of the things, can I point this out though? Yeah. One of the things that I would like to say is that I think that one of the main things that you need to look at if you're trying to find out if maybe you're getting into this kind of culty behaviors, you have to ask yourself a couple things. Has it altered your life in a meaningful way? Like, have you found yourself in a situation where you felt like you could not speak about certain things because you were afraid that you would lose all of your friends and all of your family members? Have you found yourself in a situation where you were being punished, like you were talking about, where you're perhaps like for example, Scientology? One of the things that happens is that one of the things that makes it so difficult for people to leave is they put in a whole bunch of time and money into something to the point that they admitting that they've given into a scam is far too painful for them, and they can't leave because everybody they know is there. It'd be like breaking away from all of your entire support system, which is why a lot of people commit suicide after leaving cults, is because you have abandoned your entire support system to get out.
That's what they call shunning. It's in that book, Snapping, I mentioned. It's called shunning. And basically you become an unperson to everybody.
Exactly.
That used to be your friend. They practically look through you. In some extreme cases, they literally won't look at you. You could be standing in front of them, jumping around, and they won't even look at you. It's a really brutal psychological technique. And families have done this to their children, by the way, inappropriately, within all sorts of things. Yeah, religion and other things too. You dared not to be a Democrat anymore, or you dared not to be a Republican anymore. The bottom line is that I think a lot of atheists or skeptics are confusing cause and effect. They're thinking correlation is causation. So that if you see horrible culty abusive behavior from some asshole priest or some asshole bishop or some asshole preacher or some asshole imam or whatever it is, well, it's the religion that made him like that. And what I would hope that you could at least, I mean, maybe there's some truth to that, but man, I see this kind of dogmatic culty behavior all over the place. Whereas, and you know, to defend mainline religion a little bit, I had a friend of mine who was like, "Oh, I don't tell anybody I'm an ex-Catholic because I still hang out at the church. They all know I'm an atheist, but they still love me and they don't care." See, that's the opposite of cult behavior. It just is, and it happens to be true, by the way. But go ahead. What point were you going to make?
Would you at least would you submit to the idea that there are some religions more than others that have perhaps, I don't know, aspects of their holy books that would, I don't know, could be misinterpreted by people who perhaps are not mentally stable or are looking for something, and they can take that one little thing and then just blow it up into an entire belief system?
Without question. What do you think fucking Al Qaeda is? Just for example. I don't know if I would quite put the IRA into that back when they were more into terrorism, because, like, yeah, they were Catholic, but I don't, you know, was it really the Catholicism driving that? But anyway, yes, absolutely they do, and I can have more I can tell you about that too. But go ahead.
Would you call people who are who at least are knowledgeable of this and who are concerned about the culture war that's happening in a lot of these European countries and even in parts of America where people are wanting Sharia law to be there? Would you call people who are concerned about that because they are also concerned of people who are extremists in those communities, would you call them Islamophobic? I'm saying concern here, I'm not talking about they are heading for the hills. Would you say that this level of fear or this concern is equates to hate? No.
But it definitely doesn't, and it doesn't even equate to Islamophobia. Although I say Islamophobia is real, and a sign that you've got a problem there is if you insist there can be no such thing. And I've had people say, you know, that's a nonsense term. That doesn't exist. There's no such thing. Every fear I have is obviously rational. And it's like, ooh, that's pretty dogmatic, well, I mean, isn't it?
You could see where, but I'm wondering if you could see where some people would generally be concerned, where there are things in some of these holy books they're suggesting things like slaying the non-believers, or you know,
Let me give a shout out to recommend one thing strongly. There is a video I'm going to ask people to watch in the specific topic of violence within holy books and all that. Sam Harris, one of the four horsemen, I credit him with what I would call personal growth here, has a new book out fairly recently on Islam that he co-wrote with a Muslim friend he made, Majid Nawaz. I hope I pronounced that right. You might want to Google it on or on YouTube. I mean, Google it on YouTube.
And I'm not even saying that all Muslims even think like that, because I'm pretty sure that
No.
everybody sees a lot of these things, like in the Bible, we're talking about stoning adulterers, and they think that that's completely ridiculous, and you don't do that anymore.
Dude, Moses outright ordered a genocide in the Old Testament. He ordered and carried out a genocide. Yes. It's in the Old Testament. Anyway, let me just get this out. Look, YouTube, on YouTube, look for something called Islam and the Future of Tolerance. Maajid Nawaz and Sam Harrison. Maajid, Maajid Nawaz and Sam Harris. Now, Nawaz is a Muslim who spent many years being tortured in an Egyptian prison. And he'll go into what's really going on in the Middle East, which is that for decades now, there have been two major political forces duking it out. Hardline secularists, which is what your Arabist and your Arab nationalist groups are, who kind of accept Islam in the same way that white nationalists accept Christianity. It's just like sort of this appendage to them. And then you have religious fundamentalists who say no and want to get us back to, that's always the phrase of the fundamentalists. We're going to get back to the real thing, right? That's how the fundamentalist thinks. It's always a question of whether he's actually going back to anything other than a fantasy in his head, but whatever. Those people think we need religious dominance. And what I would say to that, and because Maajid Nawaz talks about how this has been a problem, it's been this ongoing war. And yes, there's violent stuff and instructions to violence in the Quran, but these things have to be fought intellectually. And from a combination of social forces over the last century, I'm not going to use the word imperialism because I don't like the word imperialism. Nawaz talks about imperialism and white European and colonialism, and he even once uses the phrase "check your privilege."
Oh gosh!
But give it in mind, he's a Muslim from Egypt who's sitting in front of a bunch of white liberals, so he's trying to make a point to them. And one of the points he makes is, "You don't get to tell me what my faith is. Stop doing that, you privileged white pricks." He didn't say pricks, but I totally resonated with that.
Yeah,
Stop telling me what my faith is. You don't have that right.
I can understand that, but there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things I think people are concerned about, and especially with there are certain circumstances under which Muslims are allowed to lie or deceive, and there's even the suggestion that there's a belief, at least among some, that you simply can't be friends with people of other faiths outside of Islam. And I'm not saying that everybody is like this, but there's certainly, I think, cause for concern here, because I think a lot of people are afraid that in being really, really nice and in being trying to be really, really accepting of other cultures, that they are letting in a culture that is going to be incredibly intolerant and unaccepting of them.
An alien. Yeah. Well, to get back to your first phrase, to your first question, which is the violent parts that you find in any holy book. There's people within these formal organized religions whose whole job is to sit and analyze things all day and come up with answers as to how this applies. I mean, the Jews had stopped stoning people as a form of routine punishment by the time of Christ. There is a passage in there where people were talking about possibly stoning a woman, and Jesus tells them not to do it. What's little known at the time, but although I've had Orthodox Jews confirm this for me, it's like, well, we don't, we're not even sure Jesus existed, because that's their position, but he gave the correct answer, because even by the time of Christ, the religious authorities of the time would have not approved of that stoning. And this gets to something that is very important with most of the Abrahamic faiths that a lot of people don't know, which is that they are all based on oral tradition, not just written tradition. This is not new. I didn't, that basically there is an entire oral tradition passed down by word of mouth over centuries, either never written down or not written down until long after they originated. The Jews call it oral Torah. Most of it is codified in, oh God, my Jewish friends, please forgive me. It's codified in the, I can't remember. Someone in the comments will come along. Anyway, their oral law is there. It's not in the original scriptures. Orthodox Christianity has something called Holy and Sacred Tradition, which all goes into basically teachings that Jesus gave orally during Pentecost. And no, Protestants mostly don't accept it, but Orthodox Christians do. So literally, and most Muslims, that's what imams are. They're appointed to be the interpreters. And I did hear a Muslim once say it, and he said this really well. He says, when approaching any holy book, whether it's Hindu, Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, the Bible, any of them, it's an insult to the text to think you can just open it up and its meaning will be immediately clear to you. It's an act of arrogance on your part. And
Actually,
and so without going into any one specific thing, the notion that you could just grab a verse and know what it means and know exactly how it's supposed to be applied now, you're actually putting yourself in the role of an imam and telling, your interpretation must be correct because you read it that way. And you're ignoring questions of history, of context, of whatever the oral teachings that went along with that passage really meant. There's a whole, in other words, you can sit there and say theology is Harry Potter and fantasy and we can ignore it. But even if you insist that it's all fantasy, there's people who devote their whole lives to this study and this commentary. So I can
certainly understand that. But I think that a lot of atheists have problems with the idea of what you just put forward, which is the idea that you need a human being to interpret the word of God for you, that you basically need to go through a specific human to do this, because human beings are, of course, they're not perfect. And you would have to, you're relying on certain individuals to be good and moral individuals when interpreting all of this stuff.
I'm trying to find the right way of putting this without getting us into a rabbit hole, but let me just say, you just formulated brilliantly the Protestant argument and why there is such a thing as Protestantism. Because all Protestantism is based in part on something called sola scriptura, sola fide, a few other things, all based on the notion, though, that you get to whip open the Bible and understand it on your own. As long as, you have the Holy Spirit and the right attitude, you'll be able to understand all that. That's really alien to not just the Catholic faith, but every form of Orthodox Christianity, the Russian Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox, all those Orthodox people you've heard of. They're like, that's alien. That's crazy. In fact, it's false teaching, i.e. heresy. It just is, right? Well, I mean, and now, let me just point something out to you. Take any text on a complex issue. Let's go straight to the U.S. Constitution.
All right.
This too. Let's go straight to the U.S. Constitution.
All right.
That document is written in plain English. Why do I need lawyers or Supreme Court justices to tell me what it says? And the answer for you is that when it comes to a complex text that addresses complex issues, you put a lot of brain power into it. And I've gotten into arguments with people who, constitutional conservatives who want to tell me this about the 10th Amendment or that about the Second Amendment. The fact of the matter is that the U.S. Supreme Court arrogated itself to the role of constitutional interpreters somewhere around 1800, I think. Some historian can correct me, but somewhere around 1800, give or take. And the U.S. Supreme Court just declared, we're the experts on constitutional interpretation. And that's a very arrogant move. Do you know why nobody disputed them? Because there was nobody else to do it, and people were fighting like cats and dogs over proper constitutional interpretation. So to get back to it, while you don't, while you have a good point, the danger there is that the people who are appointed to this job must be trustworthy, and some of them won't be, and some of them will be dishonest, and some of them will spin a certain way. A school of thought always develops around these things. This is a complex text, or even if it's a simple text, it's talking about complex things. So even if this text is simple, how you interpret it still won't be, right? Don't kill people. That's really easy. Okay, but then let's just say the text says thou shalt not kill. How do you interpret that? Do you go all the way to abortion is murder from the moment of conception? Or do you go all the way the other way to, well, it's okay to kill them if they're bad?
Yeah.
I mean,
I think a lot of people have, and even I have a problem with the fact that just in a lot of different holy books, there are a lot of what really amounts to contradictions. And so there'll be, in one place it'll say something like killing people is bad, and on the other hand it'll be talking about God told them specifically that it's totally okay to commit genocide against other people who are not of the same faith, who are just, or maybe just of a different tribe, because God told you specifically to do so. And I honestly think that a lot of these people, the terrorists, the Islamic terrorists, think that they are on God's side, and they can do these things because they believe that they are God's chosen people, and they're trying to create this Islamic state, which in their mind is going back to the glory days of I'm trying to remember the correct term.
The Great Caliphate or whatever.
Yeah.
The rightly guided caliphs, all that stuff.
Yes.
Always a sign of religious fundamentalism. And I'm not going to dodge your question about, I don't think I'm going to dodge a question about violence. If I do, somebody call me on it and we'll go back to it. But
all right.
I really think it's important. Here's a different, I'm going to set your presumption on its head.
All right.
Okay, that's why I'm going to take me a minute. I'm going to set your presumption on its head.
Okay.
Just for thought.
All
right. We've already granted that there are dogmatic, intolerant, inflexible people in and outside of any religion. All right, what I notice throughout history, because I studied religious fundamentalism, is religious fundamentalism always gets its energy from social chaos. When people feel very insecure and very frightened and like their entire world is topsy-turvy, the call of the holy book or the spiritual leader who has all the answers is powerful, because you're confused and terrified most of the time. And so in normal times, you'll find people who've gone through really hard times get through it, get attracted to a fundamentalist group. And in extraordinary times, like everything that's happened in the Middle East for the last 100 years, religious fundamentalism is going to be even more popular, because people's lives are chaos. Their feeling that they have any control over their own environment is almost non-existent. And so they tend to be really easily swayed by millennialist cults who tell you the world is coming to the end on October 12th or whatever the fuck. They get attracted to militant political ideologies, and they get attracted to militant religious ideologies. And as a Christian, do you know how hard it is for me to argue with a fundamentalist Christian? I want to lose my mind. I mean, I feel like I'm going to lose my mind arguing with them. I can say you're a fellow Christian, but you're not. They don't listen to me. They won't. They won't listen to their fellow Muslims who say they're full of shit either when you're talking about the religious fanatics. I'm going to recommend that talk with Sam Harrison and his new Muslim friend. Sorry, I apologize for not remembering his name. Watch it again, because they really talk about this. They really talk about this, and they go after it. And his, they're not evasive. Okay, there's violent parts of the Quran. There's violent parts of the Bible. The question becomes is, how do you contextualize that? If we look at Muhammad, just for example, there's this notion that I don't know, somehow the middle, that part of the Arab world, it was Arab, that part of the world was all good until he came along and declared war on everything. No, the correct read of history that I see is the Arab tribes, which included some Jewish tribes at the time, 1400 and some odd years ago, let's call it 1500 years ago, were constantly at war and constantly killing each other. And Muhammad rose as a uniter who, yes, with sword, but also with words, stabilized the region and brought peace. Now, that is a militant tradition for Islam. But, you know, it's called peace for a reason. He viewed himself as somebody who was bringing peace. Yeah, with a sword, but that's why you even see all these rules. Like, if you submit to Islam, war's over. Now, that's a good, 1,500 years ago, that was a great way to make people stop fighting.
Well, yeah, but so is killing everybody else who isn't Islamic. I mean, the idea is that you're bringing peace by taking out everybody else who believes something different.
That's not how the more moderate interpreters that I know would say.
More moderate.
What they would say is that was a necessary thing in that time and place. And that's why those rules, because once you accepted Islam, you're not allowed to kill other Muslims. We got peace here. And there's rules in there about how, okay, you didn't accept Islam. Well, what are the rules on how we're going to treat you? And as long as you don't kill us.
And from what I understand, the more moderate Muslims see Jews and Christians, they see them as actually all following the exact same God. So it's all the same, but they're just approaching it from a different perspective. And so that's how you get around the whole idea of, like, kill the non-believers and stuff. So technically, they're still believers, and they all still adhere to the exact same God. They still believe.
They do believe that. That's actually straight up Orthodox Muslim thinking. What the Muslims literally believe is that the Jews and the Christians who came before them got the partial word, and need to be respected because they got the partial word. But then Muhammad showed up, gave us the Quran. That's the ultimate word. That's what they believe in shorthand. And so they recognize Christians and Jews as definitely worshiping the same God. By the way, the Roman Catholic Church declared the same thing at Vatican II, that the Muslims worship the same God as Christians. So, of course, unless you hate the Catholic Church, which is popular, there you go. There's Christians accepting the same thing. But theologically, they can't be meshed, because you either accept that the Quran is the ultimate word of God or you don't. That's a binary proposition, at least within Orthodox thinking. But they can recognize each other as having common ideas, common ideals, something of a shared heritage, and here's where we're together and here's where we're not. That's not that hard. But, then someone may rip something out of, it would be like a radical Jewish cult. And they exist, by the way. The Kahanists, I believe, are like, no, I can't remember. There's radical Jewish sects who grab some of the shit from the Old Testament and use it to justify, like, killing Palestinians. That is by far not mainline Judaism, but they exist. And so when I look at what's going on in the Middle East, I see a really complex interplay of socioeconomic, ethnic, and religious factors. And when you reduce to the religious factor, and you don't even give the religious people the option of saying, wait a minute, we've got some difficult challenges here. How do we address them? We don't literally want to keep stoning people. That was appropriate 1,400 years ago when a man with a mule was a rich man, right?
Yeah.
They need time to do that, and it's their job, not yours, because you're not one of them, right? It would be like me, the Catholic, going and saying, you know what, I'm going to straighten these free thought blogs people out. Yeah, okay, that's going to fly. And you don't get to do, and I'm just saying to my friends who are like that, like, no, you got to give them a chance to do that. This is their internal monologue and their internal dialogue. And yeah, you can confront them on it. But when you have a Muslim look you in the face and says, look, I don't believe that.
Okay.
It's and I've seen the guys do this. I can point to you multiple examples of it right on my own YouTube comments of guys saying, no, this is the real Islam. And these people who are Muslims who say different are lying or crazy. And what you've done when you do that is you have eclipsed the possibility of ever having a rational dialogue with a Muslim. You just have, because you've declared what their view is.
Well, yes, but there's several different views. There's actually, I think, about was it 3 or 4 major forms of Islam. Oh, yeah. And they very much disagree. And so what would you say to the people who disagreed with the other forms of Islam and said that those particular kinds of Islam are not the correct form of Islam?
It's
Okay.
what I would say is, again, it's not your job to figure out which the right one is. It's your job to try and help ones who aren't dangerous make the situation less dangerous.
I gathered that. I gathered that,
So,
but I think
but
the
okay, but
problem is
you did bring in the issue, and I think it's a real legitimate issue, and we should probably end soon, just because we've been going on.
Yeah, I know.
Although we can totally do this again anytime you want.
All right.
But I genuinely believe there's real merit to what we're calling the so-called right-wing position, that Muslims coming here really, as refugees or otherwise, really should be getting the clear, okay, you're coming into Canada, here's the rules in Canada, and you don't get to bring that. Or you're coming into the United States, or you're coming into the UK. Saying Sharia is not the real way of doing it, because Sharia is a really much more nebulous concept than people think it is. Really, it is. But saying, look, you can't codify that into our laws. You just can't. You're not going to do that. You can have that within your mosque. You can have that within your own voluntary communities. But these are our laws. You need to respect them, or you need to not come here. I have no problem with that attitude. I really don't. I think it's a good idea, because you have these flakes, these lefty liberal flakes. And yes, I'm lefty and liberal on some things, okay? But like the social justice set especially, who who are you as the white male Christian straight cis scum to tell them? No. Those people are coming here. So, if we have a policy of welcoming them, there's a mutual obligation there.
All right.
And believe me, I already know plenty of Muslims who already get that and don't need to hear it at all. I mean, I know nuclear scientists who are Muslims. I know doctors who are Muslims. They don't have this problem. And so any other Muslims, whatever their background, and I'd say this of Jews, Christians, Hindus, whatever, yeah, we have freedom of religion here. However, this is what freedom of religion actually means here. And it doesn't mean the same thing that it does over in Turkey, where they have religious freedom, except you're not allowed to convert anybody from Islam.
Yeah.
That's not how it works here. And I have nothing against that. In fact, I think the liberal left, the Trudeau in Canada, the fucking Obama administration, they're not being serious enough about that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with, as Sam Harris has done, I'm going to keep referring people back to that, because he's one of the four horsemen, and even he's on my side now, is there's nothing wrong with confronting people and saying, look, you've got this violence problem. What are you doing about it? Or, did you need help with that? Whatever it is, that's not rude. And in fact, it's appropriate. What's the deal with that? But at the same time, you have to be willing to accept their answer when they say, look, it doesn't work that way. Or look, I don't believe that. And I think you're interpreting that all wrong. And
I would like to say something, though. So once you're done with that point, I would like to
let me ask, are you going to get about the concept of taqiyya and the idea that you're allowed to lie to people who are outside your faith?
Well, actually, what I'm going to say is this. Are you familiar with the concept of the idea of no snitching in certain urban environments? The idea that you don't, when something goes down, you don't say anything against people who you consider to be your own people. I think that exact same thing is happening in a lot of Islamic neighborhoods in the States and in Europe. And that's really the problem here, is that when you do have these people who are getting up to that stuff, they really do want to get involved with ISIS, and they really do want to commit these acts of violence. There are people who are covering for them.
Oh yeah.
And they aren't speaking out against it, and they aren't doing so. When you're telling me that that it's not our place to talk about, and we just have to accept their answer, ultimately what we're seeing is that's not good enough.
That may be true, and that may be something, we could possibly devote a whole show to it. But let me just say that at least what I just said ought to apply one-on-one.
All right.
Wherever it applies elsewhere in the world, in terms of public policy or whatever, let's just say one-on-one, when your Muslim friend tells you no, you got to look at him as a human being and decide, is this a human being who's lying to me?
Right.
And because you are referring to something there, the Arabic term is taqiyya. I've probably referred to it. I might not be pronouncing it right. Little known fact is that within Judaism, there is a similar mentality. The earliest reference I've seen to a mentality like this actually involves the Catholic Church, and it's the concept of equivocating, which is that basically in England, back when they used to murder people for being Catholic, which they did, the church formulated a doctrine which was that you're allowed to equivocate, which is basically a way of lying without lying, by letting people believe whatever they want without outright lying to them. I think Shakespeare even mentioned it. He called it the equivocating Jesuit. And in anti-Catholic circles, it used to be very common to just assert that Catholic is lying. He's an equivocator. He's lying. What you'll find with that concept is that it's rarely codified into law, into the religious law. And if you ask people about it straight up, you lying to me? You're playing tequila with me? Mostly the religious authorities, and this is why there's a good reason to have religious authorities, by the way, will tell you, I mean, I've talked to Muslims about tequila, and they're like, yeah, my imam says you don't do that shit. Okay, I believe him. I'm sorry, I do believe Aziz, if he's listening. I don't know if he is. No, we don't teach that. That's wrong. That's lying. You don't do that. That's anti-Islamic. Anybody can lie to you. So in the final analysis, it's still the human connection that matters. And when you dehumanize, I don't know, you either idealize somebody you can dehumanize somebody two ways: by idealizing them, which is what I think the progressive lefty dumb fucks do, or you dehumanize them the other way. You turn them into orcs in your head. They're orcs, they're ogres, and they're endless lying people. And that's what the frothing right does. And I mean, there were people coming into my video, which I've since hidden, but I'll show you, calling those people sand niggers, calling those people fucking tequila spouting liars, throw them out of our country, get them out of here. And that's the frothing right.
All right.
I don't think we have to be frothing right wing, and and angry, and we don't have to be airhead twit lefties.
Okay.
We don't have to be. That's not a binary choice. It's the difficult task of actually talking to people and trying to formulate policies that make sense. And the only thing I'll say there, without telling you that I know the answer, is I think our policymakers are doing a really bad job. They're a little too worried about political correctness, and they're also a little too not worried about the practical.
Yeah.
But I can't say I can solve this issue. I do know that when, I get a note on, I think it was Saturday night, maybe it was Sunday night, from a friend of mine who's a Muslim, terrified of what's going to happen to him and his family, and telling me the story about how he had people when he was a 12-year-old boy screaming at his face that he was in a death cult and needed to get out of the country. That is not the good side of us non-Muslims. And that's a real thing too. And so I would just encourage people to keep all that in mind before they start making sweeping conclusions.
All right. I think that's a good place to stop. And I also
really enjoyed talking to you.
Oh yeah, I enjoy talking to you always. We may not agree on absolutely everything, but I think more sensible discussions about this need to be had, and there needs to be a place in our activism, in the movement, to be able to say that we agree to disagree on certain things, but we are able to agree on other things, because those things are incredibly important to just human rights, everything across the board. Yeah, it's very important.
Fair. Awesome. Well, everybody, I'm sorry comments weren't working, but I know I'm going to be hearing from people on Twitter and YouTube, and I promise I'll stop being mean if you'll stop being mean, and we'll just talk. At least I'll try. But I will also remind people, I kind of am a warrior out there. I deal with a lot of shit slingers, so I do have a shit slinging. It's a reflex. I'm aware of it. I'm working on it. And it's actually okay even to check me and say, Dean, I just asked you a question. That's all right.
All right.
Check me.
Well, thank you.
All right.
Well, thank you, Dean, for coming on, and thank you all 7 of you who are still watching. And join me again sometime for whenever I decide to do the next episode.
You got to do another one. We got to do more of these. This is a good idea. Internal dialogue within the men's movement. It's a good thing.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching, and have a nice day.
Bye-bye.